So, and Juliet is a musical that anyone who knows me knows that despite not having seen it until quite recently, I fucking hate. Now, this hatred started back in like my junior or senior year of high school, where I came across an Instagram reel advertisement for the show, which featured a scene in which Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway, explains non binary gender identity to Shakespeare.
I really think it's up to you to question May's gender or sexuality, or do you think maybe May is whoever May is and it's really none of your business?
Please continue.
Thank you, bye.
I shouldn't have to tell you why that annoyed me so much, but in case you don't have sort of the context of that, Shakespeare is the cross-dressing guy. He's the gender guy. Shakespeare is the gender guy kind of all time, at least when it comes to Elizabethan playwrights, right? Cross-dressing, gender deviance, and sexuality are constant themes and constantly at play within basically all of his shows. And so to sort of ignore that basic reality of Shakespeare and also Shakespeare's life as what we would now consider to be bisexual, to sort of negate all of that for the sake of this sort of feminism, white woman clapback moment where Shakespeare's wife gets to validate the identity of a separate non-binary character to him, was deeply outrageous, ahistorical, and revisionist in my mind, because it erased Shakespeare's queerness, essentially, for the sake of Anne Hathaway getting to have a little girl power moment. This is something that I have never truly forgotten about because it pissed me off so much and sort of cemented itself in my brain as the sort of image of Juliet that I had for a very, very long time. Recently, I decided to actually watch this show to, give it a fair chance and sort of figure out if I have been being too hard on it all this time, if it's really as bad as that one ad that I saw like 3 or 4 years ago made it seem. Now, having watched the show through completely legal means, I can tell you that that particular scene is not as bad as that ad I saw made it out to be. They do acknowledge that Shakespeare's plays feature frequent cross-dressing, and in the actual show, they do acknowledge that Shakespeare had romantic and sexual relationships with other men. Now, whether any of this is handled well, I would argue it is not. I would argue that Shakespeare's bisexuality is meant to be a sort of gotcha in Anne Hathaway's arguments against him, and that it's not really treated as something serious, as something sort of important to his work and to his life in the way that it really should be. But at least it is acknowledged. At least they are not fully erasing Shakespeare's queerness, right? Now, still, I have a lot of issues with Juliet. What I want to talk about today is how Juliet handles trans characters. Specifically, how it handles non-binary characters, more specifically, how it handles the character of May. May is a non-binary, they-them pronouns using individual in the musical Juliet. I'm not gonna sit here and gripe about how, they-them pronouns weren't in use in the Elizabethan period and how someone wouldn't have that language to describe themselves in that time because that First of all, and Juliet is not going for historical realism. Obviously, it is not a show that seeks to recreate the Elizabethan period or to recreate sort of even like the time period and setting of Romeo and Juliet. It is a show that is set in, based on the costuming, the 2010s. I guess because that's when a lot of the music is from, that they decided to dress everyone very 2010s in a way that was kind of offensive to my eyes. The 2010s aren't back yet, okay? We have that 20-year trend cycle. I don't like seeing 2010s fashion in the year of our Lord 2025. You gotta wait until at least 2035 before that starts being cool again. I don't feel nostalgic for the 2010s, okay? The 2010s were the decade where I developed depression, okay? I don't like them. Anyway, that's not relevant. What is relevant is how the musical handles the character of May. So, today I am going to be breaking down the numerous ways in which Juliet fails to accurately represent and champion trans people. Juliet is a musical, a jukebox musical more specifically, featuring various pop hits of the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and sort of is a reinterpretation of the story of Romeo and Juliet, except this time it is Anne Hathaway, Shakespeare's wife, sort of in the driver's seat of the story, seeking to make it more about female empowerment, baby. I went into this show expecting to hate it, not only on the basis of the fact that I knew there was a trans character that I was pretty sure wasn't going to be represented in a way that I saw as genuine, but also to hate it on the basis of its like fake feminism bullshit. And I have to say, I don't have as much to say about that. Don't get me wrong, and Juliet is like bad for feminism, but not even really in an interesting way. Like, it didn't even really do the things that I thought it was gonna do. It was kind of just fucking boring. Like, this show is kind of fucking boring, guys. Not a lot happens. It's kind of just, the story is just a vehicle for the musical theater delivering of these pop songs in the way that a lot of jukebox musicals are. So I don't even really have a whole lot to say about it. I also sort of feel like the ways in which it is bad for feminism are way more obvious than I thought they were going to be. I thought they were going to be more sort of like, well, you know, it's too capitalist, or, you know, it's not this, it's not that, it's like, but both Juliet and Anne Hathaway still end up with the shitty men in their lives at the end. Juliet gets back with Romeo, and Anne Hathaway gets back with Shakespeare. That made no sense to me. I thought the whole point was that Juliet was a strong, independent woman, and she didn't need a man, and it's like, oh, but then she chose Romeo at the end. Here's my issue with that. Juliet is not an actual person, right? In the canon of Romeo and Juliet, in the canon of and Juliet, she is a character. If Juliet was somehow magically a real person, and she somehow magically went through this real thing, and then at the end evaluated her life and made the decision to try again with her relationship with Romeo, who is now also a real person, I guess, that's one thing. But she's not a real person, right? She's a fictional character, and someone wrote her life and wrote it this way. She doesn't actually have agency. She doesn't actually have choice. And she was written to, in the end, make the choice to go back to Romeo. Even though the show's sort of thesis is that she doesn't need Romeo, is that she is strong on her own. And yet, the idea of a single woman in any capacity is still so threatening to the patriarchy that it is not possible for her to end up single at the end of it. But anyway, that's still not what I'm talking about today. That's a tangent. We are talking about the character of May, who is non-binary, and wouldn't you know it, I'm also non-binary. Cool, awesome, yay! So what do I think about this non-binary character in And Juliet? I think that May is very clearly just a more woke sort of version of a gay best friend. The fact that May is non-binary has no bearing on this. And the fact that May is always played by an AMAB or in other ways like male presenting actor and has, to the best of my knowledge, never been played by a female presenting actor sort of further cements this. Hello, Editing Lee here. I just wanted to clarify what I mean when I use terms like AMAB and AFAB in this video, because I did explain it, but it was during a section where I was going just on an incoherent, unnecessary rant about lesbianism, so I cut it. But basically, when I use terms like AMAB, AFAB, male presenting, female presenting in this video, what I am sort of referring to is not like the genitalia or like the birth certificate status of an individual actor. It is more about how that actor is perceived by the like cisgender audience that is watching them, you know? So like, for example, I would call myself AFAB and female presenting for all intents and purposes because most people who encounter me just sort of assume that I am female, even though that is not how I identify, you know? So that's sort of what I'm talking about here, is it's about how people are perceived, and it's not about their internality, their gender identity, and it is not actually about the state of their body, because that doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter to anyone. But I do feel like it is an important distinction to make in our binary and transphobic world. May's non-binary identity is completely secondary to their relationship with Juliet, to their friendship with Juliet. And you could even argue that May's non-binary identity is a way within this sort of gay best friend trope to further desexualize and dehumanize them, of taking away even their identity as a male in order to make the gay more prominent in some way. Basically, May's gender is not non-binary, May's gender is twink. To sort of further cement this point, while May wears makeup, May wears feminine-ish clothing, May has their nails done, May is never seen in a dress or in a skirt or in any other sort of typically feminine gendered clothing, because Broadway is still too cowardly to put a male presenting, again in quotes, person in a dress for anything other than comedic purposes. And to sort of further cement this idea that May's gender is inconsequential to their actual character, that they are just a 90s gay best friend with a non-binary coat of paint slapped on, is the way that they interact with Juliet and the way that sort of Juliet interprets them. So the scene that I'm going to talk about is an incident in Act 1 of the show where May goes to the bathroom. You know, a very typical alienating, isolating trans experience. May goes to the bathroom, right? And there are men's toilets and there are women's toilets. Whatever are they to do? Look, this is a thing that is an issue. It is a thing that is especially an issue right now, particularly for trans women, of which And Juliet has none. I believe May ends up using the women's restroom, And while this can be seen as like a gender transgressive moment, and in some ways, I guess it kind of is, it also sort of calls to mind Damien from Mean Girls going into the women's bathroom, you know, just sort of that trope of the gay best friend going into the women's bathroom because they're not a threat. But anyway, May goes into the women's restroom with Juliet. May has this moment with Juliet where Juliet says, I don't think of you as a boy or as a girl, just as my friend. Now, this is a sentiment that is very popular when it comes to championing the identities of non-binary people. It's, I don't care if you're a boy or a girl, you're still my child. That sort of thing. And while that is helpful and that is affirmative, I wouldn't necessarily say that it should be sort of the motto of the trans movement, because we are still not defined in relation to other people, you know? Like, May's gender isn't Juliet's friend, or at least it shouldn't be, even though I would argue it very much is. May's gender should be May's gender. It should be something that they hold separate from their relationships with other people. And yet, in this moment, sort of the like clapping moment is, oh, well, Juliet doesn't see gender, she just sees her friend. She just sees someone that she has a relationship with that she can rely on. How would she view a trans person that isn't her friend? How do you view trans people who you don't even like? Are they still trans to you? Do you still validate and accept their identity? Or do you only accept their identity because there is something in it for you? In this case, having a gay best friend. Now, this scene gets even more complicated because in an absolutely baffling turn of events, May's big solo song is I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman by Britney Spears. Now, you may be thinking, wow, what a creative way to reinvent this song, to put it through sort of a trans lens. Yeah, I mean, that sort of brings up my big issue with jukebox musicals, which is like the way that they reinterpreted this song and sort of stripped it of all its previous meaning is not necessarily something that I ideologically agree with, right? But I will say it is very interesting that this song is one in which May affirms over and over again that they are not a girl, right? That this quote-unquote male presenting, assigned male at birth, yada yada yada, once again putting yourself in the perspective of a cisgender audience member who sees things through this binary lens, that they are constantly affirming that they are not a woman, that they are not sort of a threat in that way of sort of being a trans woman, right? And especially in a show with no other like trans women in it, it sort of makes it hard to not see that interpretation of the reason why May is singing I'm not a girl and not I'm not a boy is because the threat of them is that they will sort of go all the way into trans femininity, something that is seen as dangerous and as deserving of mockery and of public humiliation and of sort of ostracization. And the threat is not that they won't be a boy because they sort of still are a boy in that way that their gender is negotiated through sort of this gay best friend identity. You may think that's a bit of a stretch. That's fine. This is obviously not the on the surface point or interpretation of this song. This is not the intended reaction, or at least the tended conscious reaction that the audience member is meant to have. But in a world that is so incredibly hostile to transgender women, it is important to think about the implications of these things, to think about the ways in which any sort of affirmation that an AMAB, non binary person says, I'm not a woman, separates them from this trans woman identity that is so heavily stigmatized. I think this entire sort of this giving of this song to May really just shows a lack of consideration and of sensitivity on the part of the people who wrote this show, because there is a line in this song where May says, I'm not a girl. There is no need to protect me. In an age where men in women's bathrooms is such a moral panic, in an age where protect trans people is a necessary rallying cry against an ongoing attempt to completely obliterate the existence of transgender people and to remove us from public life, you really need to carefully think about what the implications of the fucking lyrics of the fucking Britney Spears song that you are giving to your one non-binary character in this fucking Shakespeare jukebox musical are. Because while it is not the intention of those lines in their original context, putting them into this context sort of undermines the idea that one, May can be connected to womanhood, to femininity in their identity as a non-binary person, and two, that you need to protect trans people, which you do need to protect trans people. And yet, this song, given in this way, in this jukebox musical, has these very dangerous, very insensitive implications that show just the lack of care with which May's character was written. Once again, that's not the point of giving this song to May, right? That was not the stated intention of the song in its original context or in this context, but that is a way that it can be very easily interpreted to make someone like me, a non-binary person, legally watching this show, feel very uncomfortable, and to realize that the people who made this show don't really have any sort of care for actual trans people, did not actually think about the deeper implications of this song when applied in this way. There is another issue, and it sort of ties into the fact that Broadway also kind of hates lesbians. I'm going to be talking about the way that this show handles the song I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry. Now, I Kissed a Girl is not a good song. You know, it has been torn apart over and over again for the ways in which it trivializes lesbian identity. It's not a lesbian anthem, it is a song for straight people. Like, there are people who have said that sort of more eloquently than I have, but it is widely accepted that I Kissed a Girl is not a lesbian anthem in the same way that Red Wine Supernova is a lesbian anthem, right? I Kissed a Girl is a complicated song. It is a song that came out of this sort of early 2000s cultural moment of female bisexuality and how hot it is to watch a girl kiss another girl. It's not a song that came out of actual lesbian politics or anything like that. And yet, it is a song that is about female desire for another woman. If you are going to include this song in a show like this, you have to be very careful about the way that you apply it. A way that I could think that you could incredibly easily apply this song in a new, transgressive way is to make Juliet kiss a girl and then sing the song. But in a Broadway landscape that is so hostile to lesbians and to sapphic desire, of course, that is not a possibility, that is not something, having Juliet be a lesbian or being bisexual is not something that is really possible in this show. So instead, what they do is they have this guy, this cis guy, sing the song about men, who just sang a song about how they're not a girl. But whatever, because now this guy's singing I Kissed a Girl about this person who's not a girl. Look, I wasn't entirely familiar with all of these songs. I knew most of them, but I'm not entirely familiar with them to the point where I could catch like lyrical changes or anything like that, especially when they're very subtle. But the one lyric change that I did catch was the changing of "hope my boyfriend don't mind it" to "hope my girlfriend don't mind it," a reference to the fact that at this point in time, this character, Freddie, I think his name is, fucking whatever, Frankie, his name's Frankie, because he's Francois, because he's French, they're in Paris, it's a whole thing, don't bother. Frankie is, at this moment, engaged to Juliet, but then kisses May, and then sings I Kissed a Girl about May, who's not the girl. The girl is Juliet, but he sings it about May. Now, out of context, what you have done here is taken an incredibly complicated, historically situated, problematic song about lesbian desire and turned it into a song where a man sings about how he just kissed a girl and he hopes his girlfriend doesn't mind it. You've just turned this gay song straight, you know? Now it's a man singing, "Oh, I just kissed a girl, hope my girl..." What the fuck? Broadway let lesbians have anything challenged. No, they can't. They can't fucking let lesbians have anything. Even I Kissed a Girl, which we didn't even really want that bad, but it still kind of stings when you take it away from us. Even though it would be incredibly easy, incredibly fun, and genuinely transgressive to make Juliet queer and to give this song to her, instead, because that is not an option, this song is given to a man to sing about a non-binary person and a woman. Further complicating this with not only May's assertion that they are in fact not a girl, but sort of May's gay best friend Twinkie gender, and what you get is bad. Hi, it's Editing Lee again, because I just realized while rewatching that section of the video that if May was AFAB, that scene would be awful. Like, that would just be this guy blatantly and pretty unapologetically misgendering a non-binary person, which is what it is. But again, it sort of cements the fact that May, like, needs to be AMAB or otherwise male presenting in order to sell this gay best friend thing, and that is the true purpose of their character and not a sort of genuine representation of non-binary people, because to have someone in that role that does not fit this gay best friend archetype would mean that the entire thing falls apart incredibly quickly. So that's kind of where a lot of my problem with the depiction of transness and Juliet stems, is that it's not an earnest depiction of transness. It is a depiction of transness that seeks to minimize, seeks to make light of, seeks to sort of turn non-binary identity into something toothless, into something sort of harmless, to something adjacent to a gay best friend, to something nearly identical to a gay best friend with some pronoun shifts. So here's the deal. I understand that at the moment in time that we are at right now, it is not necessarily productive or necessary to criticize the minutiae of a trans character who exists on Broadway, because it's great that there is a trans character who exists on Broadway. The problem is that there are so few trans characters that exist on Broadway that it becomes necessary to criticize this one, because this one sort of speaks for all trans people in terms of Broadway, because there are so few of us represented on Broadway, because, say it with me, Broadway hates trans people. So in that case, it becomes necessary to sort of pull apart the ways in which this character is failing trans people. If there were more trans characters on Broadway, then the impact of May as a character would be lessened very significantly. But there aren't. In which case it becomes necessary to criticize this and to point out the ways in which this character still upholds the cisgender norms of Broadway and doesn't actually in any substantial way challenge those norms just by existing as a non-binary person. Is it great that there is a non-binary character in a musical? Yes. Should this non-binary character be treated with more care? Yes. Would that not be an issue if every character on Broadway was non-binary? Yes. So, this Pride Month, I am calling on you to call your local representative and tell them to make every Broadway character trans. They're all trans now. Elphaba's literally, I think she's intersex in the book, according to a Tumblr post I saw. Make her intersex on Broadway, you fucking cowards. And make her kiss Glinda. And make her kiss Glinda. Yeah. Happy Pride. Go throw a brick. And don't watch Juliet. It's not worth it. I promise. It's not even as interesting as this video made it sound. It's kind of just really boring. Goodbye.